Hi, this is Shawn. We're about to kick things off and get underway, but before we do, well, it's another one of those situations that we can just no longer ignore. There is a crisis on the Texas border, a crisis that remains largely, supposedly unnoticed by our Washington, D.C. government, but a crisis nonetheless. Thousands of people, and I'm talking about 100,000 or more, are entering our country now, completely illegally, not vetted. As much as 22% are reported to be sick. In the midst of a world pandemic, if nothing else, it is bad business for the American people, and especially for Texans. We take this threat seriously. It is nothing less than an invasion in our country, an invasion that the people at the White House would just as soon ignore. You see, it does make them look kind of bad. You'd think they'd be getting used to that by now. But the bottom line is this. While this may not be the Texas that so many of us grew up in, we are still the people that grew up together. The thing about most Texans is this. We will be pushed. We will be patient. We will put up with a lot of ignorance from our national leaders. But the truth is, there is a limit. And what I see from my location here, we are quickly closing in on that limit. Thank you, Governor Abbott. We haven't always agreed through your term, but nowadays, you seem to have your head on straight. And we appreciate you and your attitude. But here's the real bottom line. There is another group of people that, from the bottom of our heart, we care about you, and we appreciate you every minute of every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because you're there. It is the thin green line, the United States Border Patrol. Thank you for giving us so much of your time and your concern and sacrificing and risking on our behalf. We know you're overwhelmed. We know you're tired. And we know it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. But generally, as a rule, the people of Texas stand behind you. And we thank you. Let us know if we can help. Now, there is another issue I want to address before we get started, and that is, of course, Foxy, the one-eyed wonder dog, the chief of security here on the Free Range Texan podcast. She is with us still in the studio here, Studio A at the A-Team-PR Studios. And Foxy has been vigilant, ever vigilant. But there is an issue I would like to address. This is not the first time this has come up, but I need to give everyone a reminder. So many of you send little special things into our podcast, and we appreciate that. We appreciate the content for a lot of our stories, but there is, of course, the little box of special sweet treats that get sent to us now and then. The only thing we would ask is, please label clearly, they are, after all, dog treats. Well, that's all I'm going to say about that. I think we ought to get started. The following is an A-Team PR production.
Welcome to the Free Range Texan podcast. We're kind of an escape hatch for everyday life. We know today's world has issues. Maybe that's just all the more reason to spend some time. So saddle up with a bunch of Free Range Texans. Here's one now, our host, Shawn.
It is episode 63 of the Free Range Texan podcast. Howdy, y'all. This is old Michael Shawn. We are glad to have you on board with us. Stan Troy, our old friend on this podcast, who's been on a couple of times earlier, singer, songwriter, recording artist, lives in the hill country in, it's God's country. That's what I'm going to tell you about that, where he lives down there. But he is our special guest on the show, and you'll see why coming up. Also, there is a Michael Shawn's Campfire, like always. And we'll trot down and have some cowboy coffee and help ourselves to a good campfire story. We got that and a whole lot more coming up on episode 63 of the Free Range Texan podcast. You see, there's this friend of mine out here in West Texas. His name is Bob Stoll, and he's an interesting character. Something that he does that's a little bit out of context for Bob, he gets on social media. And I saw this. It's something he posted, and I loved it. Thanks, Bob. A cowboy named Bud was overseeing his herd in a remote mountainous pasture in Montana when suddenly a brand new BMW advanced toward him in a cloud of dust. The driver, a young man in a suit and Gucci shoes, Ray-Ban sunglasses, and a tie, leaned out of the window and asked the cowboy, "If I tell you how many cows and calves you have in your herd, will you give me a calf?" Bud looks at the man, who obviously was a yuppie, then looks at his peaceful grazing herd and calmly answers, "Sure, why not?" The yuppie parks his car, whips out his Dell notebook computer, connects to his singular cell phone, and surfs to a NASA page on the internet where he calls up a GPS satellite to get the exact fix on his location, which he then feeds to another NASA satellite that scans the area in an ultra-high resolution photo. The young man then opens the digital photo in Adobe Photoshop and exports it to an image processing facility in Hamburg, Germany. Within seconds, he receives an email on his Palm Pilot that the image has been processed and the data stored. He then accesses the database through the ODBC connected Excel spreadsheet with the email on his BlackBerry, and after a few minutes receives a response. Finally, he prints out a full-color 150-page report on his high-tech, miniaturized HP LaserJet. He then turns to the cowboy and says, "You have exactly 1,586 cows and calves." Bud says, "Well, that's right. Well, I guess you can take one of them calves." He watches the young man select one of the animals and looks on with amusement as the young man stuffs it into the trunk of his car. Then Bud says to the young man, "Hey there, if I can tell you exactly what your business is, will you give me back my calf?" Well, the young man thinks about it for a second and then says, "Okay, why not? You're a congressman for the U.S. government." "Wow, that's correct," said the yuppie. "How did you guess that?" "No guessing required," answered the cowboy. "You showed up here even though nobody called you. You want to get paid for an answer I already knew to a question I never asked. You used millions of dollars worth of equipment trying to show me how much smarter than me you are. and you don't know a thing about how working people make a living, or about cows, for that matter, this here's a herd of sheep. Now, give me my dog back out of the trunk of your car. And that, folks, is what the problem is all about. We all are aware that our world has changed. The free-range Texan has one very important message for our United States listeners. Be kind, but with your eyes wide open. Be vigilant. Be ready to guard your freedom. Hey, why don't you spend some time riding with the best little podcast in Texas, the Free Range Texan. Hello, Stan Troy. Welcome to the Free Range Texan.
Hello, Michael. How are you?
I'm blessed better than I deserve, brother. And you have gone through an amazing and at times gut-wrenching time. You showed remarkable amounts of courage when you picked up the phone and shared it with me, what was happening to you in your life. And this is a guy, ladies and gentlemen, who lives out on, I don't know, last I heard 600 plus acres out in the Texas Hill Country on a ranch. And he and his wife lived there in one of the original ranch house buildings on the ranch, as far as I'm led to understand, and leads a really serene lifestyle. He writes music, and he sings and plays in different places there in the Hill Country, and he's quite well known. And with that as an introduction to you, Stan, I want you, and this may not be totally pleasant for you, but I want you to tell the story of what happened when you went to the doctor recently, a few weeks back, and tell us what they told you.
Well, I'll tell you, Michael, that the last word that either I or my wife expected to hear was cancer.
Yeah.
In fact, I used to pride myself thinking, the last thing that will ever happen to me is cancer.
Yeah.
I felt like I was living a fairly healthy lifestyle, not perfect, but healthy enough.
Sure.
And back in April, I was coughing, and I coughed for about a month, and my wife finally said, "You need to go to the doctor," and so I did. And the doctor said, "This doesn't look good. We're going to do a chest X-ray." And the chest X-ray showed something. They said, "We don't know what it is." And so they referred me to another doctor, which led to another test and another doctor and another test. And it was 2.5 months worth of tests before we finally figured out not only what cancer was, but what kind of cancer this really was.
Yeah.
And that was just like a punch in the gut. We were down at MD Anderson in Houston, and Dr. Glisson looks at me and says, "We can't cure you. We can treat you, but we cannot cure you."
Was that stage 4? Did you tell me that?
Yeah, stage 4 lung cancer. And stage 4 means that the cancer had spread to other places. Not only did I have a very large tumor in my left lung, but I also had several spots in my brain where it had showed up.
Oh, my.
After that, it was a matter of waiting to find out what kind of treatment I was going to get. And I'm smack dab in the middle of chemotherapy and targeted therapy right now.
Now, a lot of people may be listening to this podcast and go, well, that's sad. We haven't known Stan all of our adult lives like you have, Michael. But is he just here on your podcast because you are my dear old friend? And you might think that in the beginning. But podcast friends, I would like for you to know something. There is a lot more to this story. And in just the last almost few days, 2 or 3 weeks, something remarkable has happened. And that's all I'm going to say about that. But I invite you to stick around in this interview for the rest of the story because, wow. Anyway, here's what we want to do. We want to share some things with you on this podcast. Am I correct? Did you tell me, Stan, that, for instance, this little song we're fixing to play right now, Idaloo, was something that you wrote and did a little recording of since your diagnosis. Is that correct?
Well, I didn't write it since the diagnosis, but I pulled it out and decided it was worth recording and seeing what we can do with it. And we'll see if we can't pitch it to somebody and have a little fun with it.
Didn't you tell me this was shopped out already?
Yeah.
To some entertainers?
Yes, it is, and we'll see if anybody out there wants to pick it up.
Is it okay to mention names here?
I don't know. I guess we might as well. Ranger Doug is listening to it, and it's fixing to go to Gary P. Nunn, and we'll just see what happens.
All right. Well, now, the reason why we're mentioning that is because you did not call your life to a halt. You had to go into therapy, chemo, and the whole 9 yards, and you did all that. But in between, when most people are just gasping for breath and trying not to feel like they're having the worst times of their life, you went and did what you loved. You went and found music that you had written. You actually got into kind of a small studio setup and got some things recorded because you just felt like that's what you needed to do. Friends, I want to tell you, Stan Troy is the real deal. He is actually a cowboy of sorts. He actually is a singing cowboy, and he lives there in the magnificent Texas Hill Country and spends a lot of time in solitude when his friends can't get to him many times, but the rest of the time he is known and loved. And we can tell that from your podcast numbers, your analytics, Stan. You are actually one of the highest amount of downloads of anybody we've ever had on our podcast, and that's why I thought this was prudent to come back and do what we're going to do today with you. But before we do, with your permission, Stan, let's play Idaloo on the Free Range Texan podcast.
I'm on my way to Idaloo, yonder on the prairie. It ain't much it'll do, living large in Idaloo. Idaloo, Idaloo, yonder on the prairie. It ain't much it'll do, living large in Idaloo. Idaloo, my hometown. I got lost, but now I'm found, plowing circles in the ground, and you plant the cotton in it. Idaloo, Idaloo, yonder on the prairie. It ain't much, but it'll do, living large in Idaloo. Now once I left and went away, clear to New York City. I don't see how people stay there, I like little bitty Idaloo, idaloo, yonder on the prairie. It ain't much, but it'll do, living large in Idaloo. People say it's awful small. You tell them, hell, we got football. We don't need no shopping mall. That's why you go to Lubbock. Idaloo, idaloo, yonder on the prairie. It ain't much, but it'll do, living large in Idaloo. Well, the way things go in Idaloo, you love me and I love you. Love is strong, love is true. There's paradise in Idaloo, 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 yonder on the prairie. It ain't much, but it'll do, living large in Idaloo. So come on down to Idaloo. Darling, here's what I'll do. Look into your baby blues and ask you till you say I do. Idaloo, idaloo, yonder on the prairie. It ain't much, but it'll do, living large in Idaloo.
And that was Idaloo. And if you're from the West Texas area, you know right where Idaloo is at, right outside of Lubbock there. And it's where it finally starts to get quiet when you drive out in the country from Lubbock. And, of course, Stan Troy, you're a Lubbock boy. You were writing a song about your backyard there, weren't you?
Yeah, that's right. My dad worked in the agricultural business, and he worked with cotton farmers and grain farmers, and he'd come home with a head full of grain dust or talk about some cotton that he was looking at.
Well, let me just reveal this. I knew and loved your dad. He was our scoutmaster in Boy Scouts and took us camping every month. He was an amazing guy. Like he had nothing else to do with his spare time. You know? Bless his heart. I loved that man. I really do.
Yeah.
All right. So
I admire the farmers who can get on the tractor and work at it all day, day in, day out, week in, week out, you know, all year long.
Yeah.
And so there's something to be said for those small Texas towns as well. And Idaloo is one of them.
Oh,
doesn't have to be huge to be great.
All right, I got you, brother. All right, now let's get back to what we were talking about before. You had what was for you and anyone that knew you and loved you earth-shaking news, and it was very frustrating the day we got the call from you, Stan. We didn't like it, and we didn't know what to do except for pray. And so tell us then what happened.
Well, Michael, people who talk to me now and who have talked to me before when I was feeling like I had one foot in the grave, they say, Stan, you don't sound like somebody who has cancer. And that's because whatever is going on in my life right now, whatever is going on in my body, Michael, we've got it on the run. And so I give thanks and praise to God for that.
Now, when you say on the run specifically, what do you mean by that?
What I mean is that the tumors in my brain are gone. And I had a tumor in my left lung, the upper lobe, that was the size of a hard ball. 9 by 6 by 7 centimeters, and it's down to 2.75 centimeters. And my oncologist, Dr. Reber in Fredericksburg, phoned me to tell me the good news. Here about a week and a half ago, she looked at the scans, and she said, I've got great news. And so she told me what I just told you.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, that sounds good to me. But just how great is it? And she was very excited on the phone to tell me, Stan, this is great. And so whatever results the good doctors were expecting, this was very good news. Probably more than I would have hoped for.
Now, is this something that they see all the time, that they see people that walk away from a hideous cancer situation and just a few weeks later go back in and things just disappear? I mean, did anybody say anything about that?
This is on the upper end of the scale. You know, if 1 is bad and 10 is wonderful, this is a 10. Yeah.
Oh, my. What do you attribute that to, Stan?
Well, I attribute it to something that I don't fully understand. What happened was I really did, looking back, I feel like I did have 1 foot in the grave. I felt horrible. Yeah. And I just kind of went to pieces. I fell apart. And in the middle of that falling apart, maybe what I didn't realize was that I still had faith. And that the faith that I had was in something or someone that I knew was there. And yet I had not really exercised my faith very greatly, very much, for a good while. Maybe it's like taking something for granted.
Yeah.
And you know it's there, but you just kind of take it for granted. Well, I think you've asked what happened to me. Well, what happened to me was I didn't have anywhere else to turn. I just came to pieces. And I turned to God, and the events that unfolded after that have been pretty amazing. There have been all kinds of people praying for me, and the way I understand prayer is an active expression of faith. That faith is not just something sitting on the shelf, kind of the way I'd put my faith on the shelf. Yeah, I know it's there. Yeah, I know God is there.
Yeah.
But faith is active. Faith is doing something. And what I found out is that there were hundreds of people who are praying for me.
Mm-hmm.
People are sending me notes, or sending me cards, or sending me pictures and texts and phoning me and saying, well, I just want to know how you're doing today. And all those things picked me up. Literally picked me up. There's an old song that the church used to sing back in the revival days, and it's called Love Lifted Me.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you that. Love lifted me. I found myself lifted out of despair and the hopelessness that I was feeling, because I didn't have anything in myself that would really pull me up. I was feeling like maybe life was over, and I was just seeing things flashing before my mind, the things that I didn't want to stop. I don't want this to stop. I don't want that to stop.
Yeah.
I don't want to leave my family behind right now.
Yeah.
And I believe that God answers prayer, and there have been a lot of prayers going up, and a lot of people expressing their love for me in all kinds of ways, and that's picked me up.
Stan, I notice as we're talking here that brother, you know how I feel about you, and I'm not chastising you at all for this, but I can't help but notice that you stop short of using the word miracle. And gee whiz, I don't know how to tell you this, but there are a lot of us out here who know and receive and absolutely pray prayers of thanks for the miracle that you are experiencing right now. And I'll tell you something else too, Stan. And you know I love you, man. You are my brother. But I will tell you that very clearly, he ain't finished with you. You have purpose, or he could have easily let you go. You have purpose, and won't it be fun to find out what all that purpose is in your future?
Amen. Yeah, I'm with you, Michael.
Well, I didn't mean to preach at you, but there you go.
Well, that's fine. A miracle, the way I understand miracle, a miracle is a sign. It's a sign of God's presence and God's power.
Yeah.
And so I've been lifted up, and I give thanks to God for it. For the prayers, for the medicines, for the doctors who doggedly stayed on this until they knew just exactly what was going on and how to treat it. And so, I give thanks to God for every single bit of it.
But they treated it telling you to your face, we ain't going to win this one. We might slow it down, but we can't stop what is happening to you. But apparently there was someone that could.
Well, that's right. And we're going to see how far this goes, because we live life each and every day. And there's a quotation out of the Bible, and this is the way I'm trying to take things now. Better is one day in your house, O Lord, than thousands elsewhere.
Yeah.
And so, people don't know how long their life is going to go on. I have a 100-year-old mother-in-law. She wouldn't like me to remind anybody that she's 100. But, she's a miracle to me. She made snickerdoodle cookies for me the other day. Now, tell me what's going on there.
I like her.
My wife had an Aunt Catherine, who lived to be 106. And life was not easy for Aunt Catherine. She's a story all unto herself. But here's a miracle for me. What happened with Aunt Catherine was when she was 106 years old, she called the nurses in and said, I'm going to go see Jesus now. And she closed her eyes, and that was that.
Oh, wow. Gee whiz.
So whether it's one day with the Lord, than a whole bunch of days doing things that don't give a person pleasure or joy or
purpose.
Or purpose.
Yeah.
I'll take one day. And I'm thankful for this day that I have right here today.
Stan, the song Solid Heart has an interesting backstory. And first of all, when did you write Solid Heart? And tell us about the story of how you were inspired to do that.
I wrote the song Solid Heart about 2 years ago. And the way it happened was I was working on a fence line out here on this ranch where we live, cleaning out brush, checking wires, and I got to the corner. And this corner is important because there's a wire gap right there in the corner that goes to neighbors' pastures.
Yeah.
If a cow gets loose in your pasture, if the bulls are fighting across the fence and they tear up the fence, then you can fix the fence and you can open up that gap in the corner and get the livestock back where they need to be. And so I was cleaning out this corner of cat claw and cedar and little scrubby trees and stuff that had grown up. And once all that brush was out of the way, I stopped and I looked, and lo and behold, there was a corner post. Well, miracle of miracles, this fence had a corner post like every other fence has, and that's no big deal. But something caught my attention, and it was the way this corner post looked. And I got up a little closer and started looking at it, and I realized, man, this thing is old. It looked like it was old. I mean, It's aged. It's got some chunks missing out of it. The wood itself just looks really, really old. I went back and asked my wife, how old do you think that fence is and that corner post? And she didn't really know. She couldn't figure it out. So I asked her brother, and he says, Stan, man, that fence post has got to be at least 100 years old. And so I got to thinking about that, 100-year-old corner post. Well, the reason that corner post lasted as long as it did is because the men who built the fence knew that they needed to build it to last. Something they say about those Germans who kind of built this country up around here was they always built things to last. And there it is, a 100-year-old corner post. When they were looking for a post, they didn't look for something that was just going to last a little while and, we'll redo it later on. They found something that was going to last, and so they looked for a post that didn't have any sap around the edge of it, but instead it was a post that they would call solid heart cedar. That's what they were looking for, and that's what they found, and that's what they cut, and that's what they stuck in the ground, and that's what we've been tying on to as the fence goes down over the years for 100 years now. That fence post is solid heart. Well, I don't know just exactly when it was after looking at that corner post that it occurred to me, I've known people like that. Especially I've known men like that. Men who say things like, my word is my bond. People who are going to stand up. People who are going to stand tall and stand strong. And you can grab onto them and hold on to them because they're not going to let you down. Well, I've known men like that. And when bad things have happened, they're men that I've been able to turn to, and they helped me through whatever situation it was. When I went to pieces, they were there for me.
Yeah.
And so the song Solid Heart, there was a man named Johnny that I met out west of El Dorado when I was living out there, and he more or less personifies a person who I'd call solid heart. When he rode up on his horse, my buddy who was with me said, how old do you think that fella is? And I said, well, the way that he's riding, he looks like he's about 20. He says, guess again. He's 80 years old. Solid heart.
Oh, man. Stan,
that's what the song is about.
I would like to suggest to you that it takes a solid heart to know solid heart when he sees it. And you, sir, are one of the best examples. Thank you for being on our podcast, buddy.
Thank you, Michael.
I love you, brother.
Adios.
And now, here it is, Stan Troy and Solid Heart on the Free Range Texan podcast.
He rides up straight as an arrow. He sits a big bay horse. He has not looked his age since 1954. 60 years of working cattle has left behind some scars. But where it counts, he's solid heart. Solid heart. He's a corner post. Nothing on earth can shake him dawn to dark. He never knows when to quit. He's a man with the bark on, rough around the edges, but where it counts, he's solid heart. Frontier he calls home, you may find if you head west. A handful of folk who live there would say more is less. City lights and high rises don't have a thing he needs. miles over in sky, there's a place where he can breathe. Solid heart, he's a corner post. Nothing on earth can shake him dawn to dark. He never knows when to quit. He's a man with the bark on, rough around the edges, but where it counts, he's solid heart. He stood the test of time. He was tried and he stayed true. You live out on the land, that's what it does for you. Solid heart, he's a corner post. Nothing on earth can shake him dawn to dark. He never knows when to quit. He's a man with the bark on, rough around the edges, but where it counts, he's solid heart. He's a man with the bark on, rough around the edges, but where it counts, he's solid heart.
Been listening to the Free Range Talent File. If you'd like more information about our guest, just go to our website at freerangetexan.net. Also, submissions to be interviewed on the Free Range Talent File should be sent to our website at freerangetexan.net. Hi, this is Michael Shawn. I think it's time we took a walk down to the campfire. There's some cowboy coffee over there. Make yourself at home. It was Edward Dobbs who said sternly, "Are you out of your mind? You think you are leaving Virginia and go with me, Emma?" The American Fur Trading Company is spending time and money sending me to manage a remote trading post way out in Wyoming. I cannot take care of a headstrong daughter like you out there. But Emma said, "I want to be with you, Father, not stay here in the East with Aunt Lily. I was the best writer at school. You don't have to worry about me. Watch me," she said. And with that, she galloped off on her beautiful black stallion, Midnight. Edward Dobbs' heart almost stopped as he saw the horse approach a tumultuous stream at the edge of the pasture and then sail over it and dash out of sight. But in a moment, the girl and the horse reappeared and were galloping back toward him. His daughter's small green hat set jauntily on top of her head, with her black hair streaming out behind her. And she wore a green dress, and it flowed in the wind. Educated at Cheatham Hall, one of the finest girls' schools in Virginia, Emma was and always had been her father's pride and joy. She was the image of her mother, who had died only 10 days after Emma's birth. He had not remarried. They lived with his twin sister, Lily, who had taken care of Emma since she was a baby, and was also her severest critic at times. Gradually, Emma would prevail, as she knew she would, with her father by making fervent promises to obey him. I think she will bear up well under the trip. She's an excellent rider, and she has promised me that she will not leave the fort alone. Her father explained all this, you see, to Aunt Lily. So Edward Dobbs and his daughter Emma left a few days later on what was to prove to be a wild and dangerous journey deep into the Wyoming wilderness. They narrowly averted brushes with Indians and nights that filled Emma with terror at the unfamiliar sounds of wild animals. The most fearful of all to her was the howling of the wolves. When they finally arrived, she was shocked to find that their destination had been this small, primitive, log-walled cottonwood buildings at the meeting of the Laramie and the North Platte rivers. How could her father have brought her to this desolate place out here in the middle of nowhere, she thought. There were no trees around the fort to protect it from the heat of the sun reflecting on the surrounding hills, just the bright sky overhead that made her feel like a tiny speck. She began to forget her promises that she had made to her father, and to think longingly of home, the home that she left back in the East. In 1850, Fort Laramie was run by the American Fur Trading Company, which had brought the post to trade furs with the Sioux and the Cheyenne nations. Seeing all the people heading out there from the east, her father said, "This is going to be the first major American outpost of the Western Plains." The 1840s had seen thousands of hardy pioneers walking, rolling hand carts, or long wagon trains on the Oregon Trail. And now there came a constant stream of gold prospectors from the Midwest and South. Emma was astonished to see the wagons of all patterns, sizes, and descriptions, drawn by bulls and cows and oxen and mules and horses. Emma watched the Indians crowd around the fort to trade. "Those people are from the Sioux tribe," her father told her, and he began talking with Mr. Husband, the manager of the post, as he watched men stow and pack buffalo robes and skins. "Do they have food here at the post?" Emma asked her father. "Most of the food that they have here is jerked buffalo meat," he replied. "And you'll have ample opportunity to try that. You may learn to like it." Emma's father had been stricter about leaving the fort since Indian problems had begun to develop. She had treated the Indian braves who came and went bringing furs with casual friendliness. Emma's dad realized that she had no idea of the dangerous impulses of these men, believing that her father's rule was, silly. One day, when he was called away from the post to nearby Fort Platte, Emma saddled up and rode out alone, dressed in her green riding cloak and her green hat perched on her black hair. She was soon galloping at top speed on her black stallion, Midnight. The men whose responsibility it was to escort her gave desperate chase, but her lead was too great, and soon she was only a tiny dot on the horizon. Gradually, the men straggled back to the fort, believing that she would return soon, surely. Some of them shook their heads as dusk fell and the wolves began to howl. Her father galloped up to the fort after dark, and his solemn-faced employees greeted him. He immediately set out to find Emma with two of the men who knew the country well, but they returned without her. There were countless reports that a girl in a green riding cloak was seen here and there along the Oregon Trail, sometimes galloping with her hair flowing out behind her. But the heartbroken father never saw his daughter again, and finally became convinced that she had been killed by Indians. Although many believe they've seen the apparition of the girl over the years, the first recorded sighting of the lady in green came 20 years later in 1871. Lieutenant James Nicholas Allison, a West Point graduate, was stationed at Fort Laramie. Shortly after he arrived, he joined some of the other men in a wolf hunt. An excellent rider on a good mount, he found himself ahead of the other men. A young woman riding a black stallion at breakneck speed would soon intersect with his path. She wore a long green riding dress and a matching hat. With a flick of her wrist, she cracked her whip across the flank of her horse, and her steed bounded across in front of him. He turned to follow this wild female rider, only to find that she had vanished with no trace of hoof prints or any other further sightings. The young officer rode out on many an afternoon following this experience, but he never saw the beautiful and reckless young girl again. Allison told his story to his commanding officer. He suggested that in his opinion, and the opinion of the men on the post, the lady in green was the ghost of Edward Dobbs' daughter, who is seen occasionally, even today. I'm Michael Shawn. It's just another tale from our campfire. Adios, my friends. Well, we're glad you saddled up for this one, y'all. Free Range Texan Podcast wants to say a big thank you to Stan Troy for sharing a slice of his life and having the courage to be here. We love you, Stan. Hope you're coming back soon. And we wish that you would subscribe to our podcast. Foxy, get in the pickup. Take 'em home, sweetie pie.
Thank y'all for listening to the Free Range Texan Podcast, produced at 18PR Studios, out yonder in West Texas, with our host, who's been voted the hardest working man in podcasting, Michael Shawn. Feedback or submissions to our program can be submitted on our website, freerangetexan.net. That's freerangetexan.net. This is Sweetie Pie, on behalf of Michael Shawn and the crew here in Studio A, where we're all looking forward to spending time with you on our next episode of the Free Range Texan Podcast. Y'all come back now, you hear?
An 18PR production. End transmission.
That's all. Can we go now, Dad?